find like on the good part of the soil. The corn's all yellow, and it's too much white to it, you know? On the poor soil where it drains better, looks beautiful.
So,
This is giant down in the sand when I take Dylan to daycare. It's
Yeah.
just huge.
You know, on Rush Prairie, that looks really good on
Yeah,
there.
I'm sure.
so when it's all wet and green, is that because it's not getting air? Or is that because it's leached away all the nutrients, or why is it so
I looked
yellow?
at the bowl. But we just put on our urea a couple days ago.
Mhm.
It takes a while for that to be taken up. That make it.
Oh.
Okay. Well, let's get going then. So, this is the, Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024 meeting of the Dunn County Planning Resource and Development Committee. Looks like we have a quorum. One Supervisor Barrier is absent, otherwise all committee members are here. So, I'll call the meeting to order. Call the roll. Approval of the minutes from June 19th. Is there a motion?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion or corrections? Supervisor?
No.
Please. No? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor of approving the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. Do we have any public comments? Anything special you guys want to say? Okay. We have no public hearing today, so let's start with the, what do you think? Is it, with respect to, our visitors, would it be okay if we move the, land and water conservation discussion first? Or do you guys want sitting around for a while? Yeah, without objection, let's move 6B up to, ahead of 6A. And, discuss the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program topic. Chase, you want to lead us into this?
Sure. So good morning, everyone. With me today is Rick Ingley. He's our conservation planner within our department. And as we've done in the past meetings, before, have a staff member come down and kind of be able to put a face to the name if you don't already know Rick, but then also to kind of highlight a couple programs that each staff person works on. Particularly today, we're going to focus on CREP. Rick does deal with our farmland preservation program as well, but the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program is a big part of his workload, especially recently. And it's also timely. We tried to coordinate that with our the other action item today that's on the agenda. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. We've got just a quick slideshow to kind of highlight the program, which will provide a little bit of background and some context around the conversation that we'll have at the later agenda item. So bring that up quick, and then I'll turn it over to Rick and we'll go from there.
All right, so we'll try to give you a brief rundown of the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, also known as CREP. Just a few kind of notes before we get started. I believe the program started in the early 2000s, sometime around then. So we're kind of just getting into the nuts and bolts of some of the implementation, especially for the easements. After that first 15-year agreement has expired. I started in the fall of 2022 and jumped right into like some active contracts. And then in the fall of the summer of 2023 is when we first started monitoring the easements, which we'll talk about later. So we're kind of learning as we go, and Chase and I are trying to navigate through all this whole process and figure out what's required and when it's required. Yeah, so I'll try to give you a general overview, and the majority of the information in the PowerPoint comes directly from the DADCAP website or some of their informational packets. So To get started, what is the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program? Essentially, it's one of the offshoot programs from the Conservation Reserve or CRP programs. It's an option for landowners with like flooded crop fields and they want to manage it differently. They get paid an incentive payment to change kind of the management of portions of their field. And it's a joint effort between a handful of agencies, and sometimes it's more agencies that are listed up there on the screen. But essentially, it's the landowners working with, usually it starts out with USDA, whether it's FSA staff or NRCS staff, to identify potential CREP areas. And then they work to complete the federal contract, and then we work with the landowners to complete the state/county contract. And the main goal with it is to protect Wisconsin's valuable soil and water resources. And kind of a main note that has been somewhat challenging to explain or to keep people to remember this fact that you can't just have, with the CREP, it requires both the federal contract and the state contract. You can't have just one or the other. Someone can't go into USDA office and sign up for just the federal contract without us ultimately completing the state contract with the landowners. There isn't necessarily, at least from DADCAP's perspective, they haven't been able to tell us what the timeline is to complete the state contract. But ultimately, we have to work with the landowners, or it's ultimately the landowner's responsibility, I guess, to complete the state CREP contract as well. So that's just one of the things that keeps popping up, and we have to keep clarifying. And it seems to be a lot of misunderstanding, and it's a quite lengthy process with a lot of variables, and we'll get into that later though. And I forgot to mention too, if you guys have any questions, feel free to jump in and ask as we go along. So who is eligible? So a landowner has to fall into one of the project areas. So there's certain counties throughout the state where landowners are not eligible to participate in CREP. It has to have a 4-year crop history, has to be within 150 feet of a waterway. And then the general practices that we see throughout Dunn County, the main ones are CP21 filter strips, which is just picture like a grass filter strip along, planted into the crop field along a waterway, or a riparian buffer, which is essentially like a tree buffer. So they'd be planting trees. Those are the main two. There are some of the other, like there's a couple wetland restorations, and there is actually one of the marginal pastureland wildlife habitat buffers, I think 1 or 2 in the county, but I haven't seen it firsthand yet, but it exists. And then kind of like I mentioned, essentially why landowners might choose to participate in this voluntary program is if they have a lot of flooding in their crop fields or pasture land and they want to pursue a different management option for that piece of land that may be better suited for them. It is a voluntary program. There's no minimum acreage requirement. And kind of one of the other big things is there's no public access is not required as part of these CREP 15-year agreements or the perpetual easements. And then what do the landowners get from this? So essentially, even though the federal contract starts first, the way it works is the federal contract starts, the CRP1 contract starts, and then after we have that signed contract, then we can do our end of the paperwork on the state and county side to complete the state agreement. But from the federal side, landowners receive the annual rental payment throughout the 15 years of that contract. And landowners do have the option to sign up for a 15-year contract or agreement, and then they can re-enroll it one time for a total of essentially 30 years if they choose to go the 15-year agreement route. And so they receive the annual payments from the federal side. They receive an upfront payment from the federal side and the state side, and that's the only payment they receive, or that's the main payment they receive from our end of things or through DADCAP. And for a 15-year agreement, it's 1.5 times the base annual rental rate. And for an easement, it's 12 times the base annual rental rate for perpetual easement. So in some situations, the easement may be more appealing to a landowner for the higher upfront incentive rate. But as we're learning and as we're educating any future or prospective participants, there's a lot more involved with that long term than just receiving a larger lump of money upfront. And then besides that, once the practice is installed, there's the 50% cost sharing for the installation of the practice from the USDA, and then DADCAP kicks in 20% as well. So there's a little bit of money for help to offset with the installation of the conservation practice. So as I've kind of mentioned, there's a couple of different ways for landowners to participate on the federal side of the things. No matter what a landowner chooses, whether they go with the 15-year agreement or the easement, from my understanding, it doesn't change anything on the federal side. So the federal contract's going to be what it is. The difference lies on the state county side of things, which is what we're working with. And just to highlight some of the main differences between a 15-year agreement and the easement is perpetual. It does last forever. It's not just one of the, I've heard people say they thought it was like a 99-year easement and eventually ended, but there's a actual statute or some legislation or something that states that it is these conservation easements do last forever. There's a title search involved and it's a longer sign up process. It takes longer. There's a lot more back and forth with DADCAP and the landowner and the title company. And if there's anything on the title search that pops up, if there's ingress, egress easements or power line limitations or anything with that, that could take a longer amount of time than just signing up for a 15-year agreement. I'll explain that later. And then the main difference is with the 15-year agreement, landowners, like if something happened, like if they plan to plant trees and they don't take and they want to get out of the program, they can terminate their federal contract, which would ultimately require for them to buy out of their state agreement, but that's only applicable with the 15-year agreement. If an easement is established, it's a recorded document. Outside of if there's like administrative error, if the landowners would change their mind, I guess, last minute within, I believe they have like a 30-day window to get out of it. But once that easement document is recorded, it runs in perpetuity and DADCAP does not release those easements. DADCAP is the holder of the easements. And some of Chase and I's research and talking to other counties, apparently the county does have the actual option to be the holder of the easement. I believe in Chippewa County, they're the holders of the easements. That entails a lot more in terms of like implementing it and enforcement of the easement requirements. So those are kind of the two main ways to participate. And like I said, the federal contract remains the same either way. And in general, give you some rough numbers. In Dunn County, there's about 100 agreements and 10 easements. There were 9 for the longest time, but then just last year we had another person sign up from new, so their contract just started in 2023. As you can kind of see on the map, there's a couple, the 15-year agreements are kind of scattered throughout the county, and then the town of Tiffany has 2 easements. The town of Wilson has 2 easements. Sand Creek has 2 easements. The town of Lucas has 1 easement. And then Springbrook is where Springbrook has 2 easements. Then Rock Creek is where the newest easement just got established. And just to kind of show you, the majority of the 15-year agreements are with the grass filters, the CP21 practice, with a handful of the tree buffers, and then the easements, it's kind of more evenly spaced out, but there's currently 3 of the grass filters and then 5 of the tree buffers and then a couple wetlands in the easements. So kind of like I mentioned earlier, this is the process, and it's as confusing as it looks, and we don't necessarily have it buttoned down yet. Like, as I mentioned, I'm a newer staff person. Grace Williams at FSA, she's a newer staff person. John Sipple's probably maybe has the best grasp of this whole process and what it all takes and the different steps and the back and forth between the different agencies and the landowners. It's very complex. It takes time. There's a lot of moving parts. And it's not just the LWCD, DADCAP, FSA, and RCS. Like, there's other components of the current staff person with Pheasants Forever does a lot of the conservation plan work. Sometimes DNR gets involved if they have a stake in the game on certain things, or for, technical assistance maybe with those types of agencies. So it's kind of an ongoing process of figuring this out. We've had a couple meetings just initially to try to modify this flow chart, because in reality, the steps don't really happen in that order as you see on the screen. So we're trying to figure it out as we go. And just to kind of give you a general idea of how the easements are established, in 2003 is when the first easements were, I guess, signed up for in Dunn County. There were originally 6 of them. Over time, with land ownership changes and that, they've turned into 9. But the original 6 easements were started in 2003. And one of the other important notes is this, it may not happen concurrently. Well, it doesn't, because the federal CRP1 contract starts first. But shortly after that, with easements, you actually sign up for a 15-year agreement and an easement. It's both. You need both documents. All those things happen from the start. They're in place from once they start, they're in place, even within those first 15 years. There's kind of been some confusion over that at times, but so the easements get signed up for during the first 3 years. The federal agencies, the way this program is set up, within the first 3 years, as needed, the federal agencies are required or supposed to monitor the easements. But after those first 3 years, I don't think there's really anything set in stone of anyone's supposed to be kind of inspecting them. So over those next 12 to, or over the next 12 years, maybe no one from either the state agencies or the federal agencies even go out and see the sites. So at that point in time, it's whatever the landowners do in terms of management or maintenance activities. It's kind of up to them in a way, and we're brainstorming ways to kind of hopefully improve that over time with any new easements. But to just paint a picture of these people sign up for these landowners sign up for these agreements or this easement in particular. There's a little bit of communication up front, but then it kind of just sits idle, and there's a lot of room for confusion or misunderstanding or ownership changes or lack of management activities and stuff like that. So there may be some flaws in the overall grand scheme of this program, but kind of is what it is, and we have to deal with it. So for these particular ones in 2018, the federal contract expires. The landowners no longer get their annual rental payments from the federal side of things, the USDA. And at that point, many of the current easement landowners, at least they've expressed it to us, many of them thought the contract is over. There were a couple of notes in our files saying we don't want to participate in the program. We want to let it expire. So from our understanding and our conversations with the landowners, a lot of them may not even have fully understood necessarily that there was still an easement in place on their land. So that was 2018. At least from some of the records we have and what DADCAP has told us, we believe that they sent letters out to all the landowners informing them that there still is a perpetual easement on their property. And we've actually found some of those letters. And then from 2018, after the federal contract expired, and once again, the easement was in place the whole time. And then the federal contract expired in 2018, and then we don't talk to them again until 2023 when DADCAP reaches out to us to inform us that we have to inspect all the easement sites. So there's a lot of room for things to happen throughout that whole time. And a lot of things did happen.
I'm a little confused. So the 15-year easement is, the 15-year contract still results in a permanent easement?
So in order to, so there's the you go back, or yeah, on the bottom left hand there, like from the federal side of things, they have a 15-year contract in place.
Right.
And if someone signs up for an easement, you can't renew that if the easement is signed up at the same time. So the federal contract expires after 15 years. Then there's, to have an easement, I don't know the necessarily why, but to have an easement, there is a 15-year agreement from the county side or the state side and an easement. So there's both. I don't know if that's like a payment thing or what, but that's the way the program was set up.
Basically, there's, you know, there's a 15-year contract with the federal
Right.
government, regardless of what avenue they pick. That contract will expire, it's guaranteed to expire after 15 years. But if they selected to do an easement at the time of signing, there could be a number of reasons for that, why they chose an easement. One is maybe they're truly interested in long-term protection of this property, which is the hope, but also 12 times the incentive rate payment, you know, there's a big chunk of money that comes with that. So that's probably quite lucrative, and maybe that could be part of the reasoning that landowners are interested in signing an easement. But that easement at the start of that 15-year agreement is in place. And the 15-year agreement expires, but the easement goes on forever.
So the
And
15-year agreements don't necessarily have an easement attached to them.
right,
It's just a contract.
just a contract.
And then
Yep,
if you do the easement, that is perpetual then.
that is, yep.
Okay.
And like Rick said, what we're finding now that we're going back and checking up on these as DACAP is, you know, leading that charge. You know, landowners just thought when the 15-year agreement expired, everything's done, and they're
Especially
just
without
making
any
it quite,
contact in between times, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
So, just, while we're talking, is there is this still an active program now? So we're still eligible to sign people up?
Mhm.
I know young beginning farmers who use this to buy farms, so,
Sure.
uh, is there like an allocation of, of money for this, or is it relatively available?
Yeah, so all the money, basically the funds are allocated directly through DACAP. They don't come into anything in our budget in any way. And my understanding, I don't know the specific dollar amount, but you know, until we receive notification, you know, this program is going to continue. It's similar to CRP when you think about the federal program when there's, you know, for example, 10 million acres nationwide type
By
of a thing.
acreage, is
Yep.
national acreage
Right, right.
limits. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
Um, Got my other question. Anybody else have, at this point, got a question? Um, Well, I know it's had to do with practices. So there are certain practices that are allowed on what are those? Is there one haying? I think one annual haying can be allowed as a practice.
Yeah, as a management practice, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit in a little while.
Oh,
Like
okay.
there's,
I'll let you go
yeah.
then. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so just to kind of give somewhat of a picture of what we discovered, I guess, or saw during our monitoring in the summer of 2023. So each year, I believe they have an intern that kind of spearheads this easement monitoring, I guess, due to the lack of funding. Like they don't have a full, DADCAP does not have a full-time position to like monitor these easements. So they're doing the best they can on trying to implement this program and follow up with the requirements of the easement. So each year they have an intern. Corey Rogers was the intern in last summer that I went out with. We went to all the existing 9 easements and inspected them, documented them. And then from there, DADCAP issued them a compliance status of either in compliance, maintenance needed, or violation. And the numbers, we had one that was fully in compliance, and that was actually one that's currently owned by the DNR in the wetland area. And all the other ones, at the very minimum, had maintenance needed requirements, and there were a handful that had the violation status and just some of the examples of like a violation where if crop field encroached into the easement boundary by 10 or so feet or whatnot. There was a structures on one of them. That's an ongoing thing that we're working on. A lot of them were just like either lack of conservation practice cover or a lot of like invasive species that grew up, those types of things, more or less maintenance type things. And then, or in some of them too, unapproved management activities like that a landowner would typically do to maintain the property, but apparently we found out that they have to go through this whole process for them to be able to do practices such as mowing or haying or grazing in some situations or stuff like that.
It all depends on what was written into the conservation plan at the time that they signed up, so, I'm sorry.
So, what happens if they are in violation? Is there a penalty? Is there, or maybe we don't know?
It's not necessary. Ultimately, like if someone just said, we're not gonna work with you,
wanna
we
do
don't
this anymore."
respect it, this doesn't exist, whatever, or they don't, in their minds, it doesn't exist. Ultimately, we don't really have an answer on what's gonna happen, but we may find out with a couple of them. But according to DADCAP personnel, there's some sort of process in place, or they're working on establishing a process on working with those. Like I said, this is just the first time we've inspected these easements here. DADCAP staff are dealing with these situations statewide and ton of ongoing things. And the way they put it to us was like the violations, like they're there, like they tend to encourage us to focus a lot of time on the in compliance maintenance needed ones to kind of help prevent them from getting into a violation status. So I really, to answer your question specifically, we don't know the process yet. We may or may not find out, but they don't, no one just walks away from these and says, oh yeah, we'll release this easement or you don't have to follow up. Like there will be follow up until compliance status is achieved, I guess.
I think the reality is, statewide, because this program is, 20 years old or so. It's really the state's, within the last 5 years, it's the state's first time experiencing where this program is.
Oh,
It's hard to say how, what the intentions were when it was laid out in the beginning, but that's kind of what Rick's alluding to, is that we really don't know what the next steps are for violations, because I think the state is still trying to navigate their way through their hierarchy. What type of, does Department of Justice get involved, and what type of, process is that? It's
wow.
difficult, so.
And I guess too, it's very just we're kind of like I said, I just started, so I didn't have a real good grasp of the program. So I'm sitting here trying to not make stuff up, but like find answers on the fly for landowners to ask us. So there was a ton of back and forth from the landowners through us to DADCAP, back to us, back to DADCAP to get clarifying stuff, then back to the landowners to try to, get them what they deserve on getting them actual answers to their questions. So just the whole process for every single one is a unique case in and of itself. Like there's no cookie cutter stuff with and even though there's only, 9 of them that we're dealing with, there's just a lot of stuff that goes behind it and a lot of hard feelings and frustration. And I would venture to guess that the majority asked if they could buy out of it or if they had to do it or if there really was perpetual. And so there's a lot that goes into it. And it seems like as long as we stick with it, and eventually a lot of them seem to come around to accepting that this isn't going away. They're gonna have to do some sort of maintenance activity to upkeep it, but still just the time commitment of the whole thing. We haven't even been able to sit down with every single landowner. We have a couple left that we have to have our meeting with and discuss everything and what the route forward is, but kind of an ongoing process. Very time consuming, very confusing, and a lot of frustration from the landowner side of things. And to be honest, our side of things too, like trying to work through it and figure it out and compromise, I guess. And then kind of, yeah, like working towards compliance. Literally every single easement, the more we dig into it, we find certain things, or there's a power line or an ingress egress easement on some of the easements, and we didn't know if that was approved or not, or because they cut down the vegetation within the easement. So is there a conflict there? Did it happen after the easement, the CREP easement was established? A lot of that type of stuff. Like I alluded to, the unexpected workload. I think we had Chase's just rough estimate for 2023 was 250 hours, and we ended up spending 500, 600 hours, and maybe more. So just a big time commitment. And one of the things we try to think about or brainstorm is how to improve communication with landowners, specifically for the easements, in terms of the one that just chose, the landowner that just chose to sign up in 2023. How do we stay in touch with them so that they're not blindsided, but so that they have an idea that the easement exists the whole time, or future landowners or their kids or whoever ends up taking over the property understands that there's an easement there and there's some maintenance requirements. And then I guess just to touch on like the DADCAP guidance, pretty much DADCAP has produced a couple guidance documents that if we have any questions about what is allowed or is not allowed, pretty much the answer is going to be in those documents. So that has been fairly helpful in terms of landowner has a question, we can look in that. I've sent every piece of guidance they've sent to us, I've mailed it out to the landowner, so they're fully aware of everything, and we're trying to keep in touch with them that way. But that's where they would say what management activities are allowed or can be pursued as part of maintaining these easements for the next cycle, I guess. So just briefly cover like the conservation plan amendment process. So the first 15-year contracts are done. It kind of kicks in to if a landowner wants to amend their conservation plan, maybe they want to start taking one hang per year on their prep easement, or maybe the trees didn't really take well and they want to change from the CP22 practice to the CP21 grass filter strip, things like that. All those things we found out need to go through the conservation plan amendment process. And that's why we're going to be talking about it today through you guys. Is one of the third steps is the third step there is landowner requests update to the conservation plan as an agenda item for approval by the LCC. And Chase and I anticipate that by the time we get the proposed amendment to the committee, that it's more or less a formality in a way. Like we've talked with DADCAP and kind of got their ideas and suggestions on what to change, on what they may or may not approve. But ultimately, if the committee approves it, then it goes back to DADCAP for their review, and then they would ultimately have to approve it. But I believe from talking with some of the DADCAP staff, the reason why they wanted to include the LCCs, or, PRND in our case, the committees, was to have some level of local input and advice or guidance or that type of thing. So that's the reason why it's included in the process. And with the process, basically, a landowner can't really seek a conservation plan amendment unless that 15-year CRP1 is expired. The county or the LWCD in our case needs to agree to inspect the easement site for the first 3 years of the amendment or that amended conservation plan. We have to identify management and maintenance of the easement, and then the easement has to have had a compliant or in compliance monitoring status within the last 5 years. So the one that are going to talk about in a little bit has had the compliance status. They're fully in compliance with the terms and conditions of the easement. And I guess just kind of the way I'm looking at this is like, I'm seeing that DADCAP's looking at this in a way of, once that first 15-year agreement's done, the easement's still there the whole time, but I think they're allowing landowners to make some management decisions kind of on 15-year cycles is the way they've kind of said it to us. So if the conservation plan amendment gets approved, that's kind of the conservation plan for the next 15 years. And in theory, I guess 15 years from now, whoever owns the land would be able to make some adjustments or changes at that point in time. And there's just an example of one of the guidance documents, kind of indicating what uses are allowed or not allowed. Yeah, if you have any questions, we can try to answer.
I would just add to, Rick mentioned that we're internally here just within the county trying to think about ways to provide better communication for the participants in the program. And some of the lessons that we've learned, particularly on the easements, was, well, if I would have known that this is a perpetual easement, I would have never signed up for it. And we weren't here in 2003 when they were all signed up. We would hope that that conversation was had, but for us going forward, trying to manage our workload, but we feel like it's important that maybe there's an annual letter that's sent out, or maybe there's some sort of communication that we can document we've had with the current landowner, just to say, hey, don't forget, there's still an easement here, there's still maintenance required. So Rick had mentioned that earlier, but I think just unfortunately too much time passes, people forget, or landowners change, and then we get into these scenarios where it's just it's a difficult, challenging situation that we try to approach these situations, being in the middle, but trying to advocate for what the program is intended for, but also trying to advocate for the landowner and some of their needs that they have, and trying to find that balance. So we're hoping to try to get some internal processes in place as we go forward. And then clearly having a very serious conversation about those that are interested in an easement. So.
Mr. Chairman, but isn't the, easement, isn't that at Register of Deeds? So if you are buying some land that it will show up that, hey, there's an easement on this land and that?
Yes.
So it is
So-
there. So unless it's a family member to a family member where they don't have to really check it out, then, but
Yeah, there was at least one that had like a cash sale or something to that effect. So that was their story as to why they didn't allegedly know about the easement and some of the,
it all
Yeah.
goes back to, buyer beware, that's why you hire somebody to check the deed.
And I think that's where maybe the frustration lies in some of these cases too, is like, they feel, somewhat maybe embarrassed or at fault for not understanding or taking that seriously. So they express that frustration to us and try to get out of it and that sort of thing. And we would, we want them to be happy with it in the end. But there's only so much that we can do too. So I think it's fortunate on several levels that we as a county are not the holders of these easements, that DACAP is the holder. So, I'm not sure, we've talked with our counterparts in other counties that do hold those easements, and I think in some cases they wish they didn't hold them. So.
I don't know, maybe this is just me, but it's sort of strange that the counties are on the hook for this when the counties basically have no decision-making authority at all in this program. Am I wrong in interpreting it that way?
Yeah, we looked into that hard too. Like, why are we here doing this?
Why?
But in the reality is that there is an agreement that the county signed. I'd have to go back and look and see when that was specifically, but it's part of a lot of things that land and water conservation departments do across the state are an extension of the state's authority, so that we do the work for them, all of our NR 151, our ag
Right.
performance standard stuff. So there is an obligation that we do what we're doing on behalf of this program. And I think when you think about, try to focus on the positive of this program, I mean, there is positivity with this. I mean, we are taking some land out of production that probably isn't yielding, it probably isn't having any return on investment in the first place. It's frequently flooded, it's wet. We've historically farmed it. And if we can create a program that sets that land aside, still provides some sort of incentive, but then Also has some soil and water conservation benefits, you know, for the local water resources, potentially for groundwater, that sort of thing. So I think there, you know, there is an interest on our part to see this program be successful. I think just right now we're stuck in the trenches of trying to, you know, navigate through the scenario that we're in. And we're not alone. It's not just Dunn County. This is across the state. So.
But it seems if you'd want more participation, you can make it a little more, like, less cumbersome, less like regulation. We gotta have two contracts, the state and the federal, and that's, I think if they really would want, because 800 acres in 24 years or whatever, I mean, that's not really taking a lot of land out of it.
Yeah, so this is a federal program by nature in its, you know, when it was first started, a federal program. The state of Wisconsin, I guess, appreciated the value that this particular program brings. And therefore, then they, I guess, developed a contract with USDA to work together on CREP specifically. You won't find this scenario in general CRP or other federal programs. This is only specific to CREP, and I think it's because the state recognized the value that this program brings. Therefore, they are the ones that set up that system of, okay, if we're going to do a federal contract, we have to have a state contract, because if we want to provide the opportunity for a perpetual easement, that's what the state is probably primarily interested in at the time. The federal government wasn't going to hold that easement. So then the state had to create that process. And yeah, so it is, yeah, as you've seen in that flow chart, it is a grueling process. And I think, you know, given the situation that we're in right now, we're probably don't have a lot of motivation to encourage people to sign up for an easement until we get more comfortable with what that entails. I think at this point, to be honest, not that we wouldn't follow through with that as we did in 23. Someone was very interested in the perpetual easement, you know, and we're going to follow through on that. That's the landowner's wishes, but we want to make sure that we're laying out the whole picture that we are experiencing right now with it. 15-year agreements at this point in time seem to be a nice, a better situation, especially like Rick mentioned, you can re-enroll those at the end of 15 years. So in reality, you're getting 30 years out of these. I mean, that's a long time when you think about in comparison to perpetual. So. And correct me if I'm wrong, Rick, at that so you could sign up for a 15-year agreement, solely agreement, not an easement. When it's time for re-enroll, you could then do an easement at that time or at a later date. You could always enter into an easement at a later date. It doesn't have to be right up from the front of the federal contract. So. But I think Rick had it in the slides, the workload that this is, you know, this has changed what our goals were and some areas that we can spend time on. And Rick's still employed with us. We haven't driven him away, but this is one of those that would test your commitment to certain things. So.
Thank you, Rick. And just on a positive example, let me share a story of that I think Chase is familiar with this too, but a young farmer in Chippewa County who wanted to buy some property. Obviously, didn't have, given the cost of property, didn't have enough money to do it. Their goal was to do a rotationally managed grazing farm. Property they wanted to buy had a lot of wetlands on it, or could be managed as wetlands. So they used a permanent easement program as a way to get a bunch of money to help them buy the farm. And they protected the conservation areas, and they used the rest of the farm for managed grazing. So, I mean, the idea could be a useful tool in our toolbox of how we help people get started farming or stay in farming, but it's got real problems, obviously.
I guess with that, that's what we wanted to accomplish for now, at this staff report is just to, obviously to introduce Rick and give him some face time with you, but then also to explain this program, given the agenda item that's coming up later, which is an easement, which does have a conservation plan amendment request. So hopefully we've kind of set the stage to allow that to happen as well. So.
Okay. Any other questions? All right, thanks. Thanks for coming, Rick. You guys are okay with staying around for a while?
Yeah.
Here's why. I'd like you to sit in on the comprehensive plan discussion. Have any thoughts? Be interested in hearing. So let's go to that discussion then. That would be item 6A. Ann, you want to lead us through the scope of work proposal?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if everybody got a chance to kind of go through this a little bit, but essentially I reached out to the WCW RPC and just said, hey, we're looking to see what services you can provide to get us going on this comprehensive plan. We kind of gave them a number and then, just kind of let them run with it. So I think on the last page of it, so there's 6 pages, they kind of run down the total costs. And they break it down. There's a few things that I'm thinking we really, really could benefit from. And then there's a few that I think we could maybe consider doing in-house and kind of cutting that cost. Yeah, Tom, you got it right there. Thank you. So I think like things like the public opinion municipal surveys, that's a $12,495. I feel like that would be something that would really benefit us. They would have all of the tools to do this pretty easily, but we wouldn't. But other things like the farmland preservation planning, I feel like we are sitting in a pretty good position to be able to do that within the zoning office and working with LWCD. I think we would be able to do that. But overall, I guess, I'd kind of like to hear what you're thinking. I have a meeting with Susan, who is leading this at 1:30 today. So I'd love to be able to kind of give her some feedback. So any thoughts from anybody?
Thoughts?
Well, because, and Chairman Quinn as well, I mean, because I'm familiar with the work of regional plan, I actually thought that the total projected costs seemed pretty reasonable for a multi-month lengthy detailed process. So I thought it looked fine. Some of the optional activities I think are debatable, but sort of the overall budget and work plan looked fine to me.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah.
Yeah, Diane, I really, since this is your strength in this area, I'm glad you mentioned that. The plan really seemed comprehensive, yeah. I'm wondering, it's just the way it looks, committee and town engagement meetings. Would that involve just the West Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission going out and doing that, or would our staff be doing that? Because it seems like our staff should develop the relationships with those people. Ann?
Yeah, so that's exactly kind of what I'm thinking too. I think they did detail that out in the scope a little bit. I'm trying to see if I can find that part. They tried to kind of lay it out like what they would be doing and what we would be doing. Let's see. Sorry, just a second. So I guess when I kind of looked at this, I envisioned that being more of a county staff and maybe a little assistance from them, but we're the ones that are going to these meetings. Obviously it's going to be tough to like go to every single town, village, and get this involved, but I think that they designed it so that there would be, I think, 4, and we would invite a group of towns to each one, and I really liked that idea. I believe that was kind of in our public participation plan too, which Tammy had developed, and I did send that to them. So I believe that they tried to keep this in line with our public participation plan. But I definitely would like to make sure that our staff is involved in that part, particularly as much as possible. And I also wanted to just comment too, I in no way meant to imply that we weren't getting a good deal with this cost. My only thought was that we do have planning staff, and I would like to be able to have them involved in this. And if it can save a little bit of money, that would be that would be good too. But no, this does seem very reasonable to me. I also agree that I don't think we would probably do the optional activities. There was one thing I wanted to bring up too. Tammy had pointed out she wasn't sure if there was anything about the sewer system, like the public sewer system plans, and having that in there, and that's something that we could definitely crack into as well. So that'll be part of the conversation with Susan today.
And could you expand on that sewer idea? I'm not quite understanding yet.
Yeah, so there's some public sewer plans or groups. So there's the Downsville, there's I think Colfax, some of these villages have actual public sewer systems, so they're not relying on private septic systems. They do have public. For planning and development, especially in some of these rural areas, we would want to target those for like future housing and things like that. That's not something that was included in our previous comprehensive plan. There's actually surprisingly not a lot of information about some of these sewer districts out there. And Tammy has been going to some of these meetings for those sewer districts, and she's really been researching a lot of that. So I think that's something that we would want to make sure we're covering in our comprehensive plan.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Ann, is there any, like relationship between, the county zoning and the county comprehensive plan?
Absolutely. So, the comprehensive plan is essentially our guiding document for everything that we're going to do as far as zoning in the county. So when I'd say, when they did the new zoning ordinance in 2013, all of these towns had to decide what zoning district each parcel went in. So they went parcel by parcel to decide, if somebody was going to be general ag or R1, R2, R3. They looked at comprehensive plans. So they looked at, what are the goals? Where is the future development, happening here? And they used that to determine what would fit best for those zones. I don't know if I answered your question, but I guess it is really, really important to zoning. And especially like when you guys review these rezone requests, we always have to look at the comprehensive plan to make sure that those rezone requests are going to fit with the comprehensive plan and what, we established in that comprehensive plan for future development of that area. So we can't really like approve a rezone that goes against the comprehensive plan. And that's legally established.
Thank you.
And in the, one of the elements is the focus group meetings based on 6 topic areas. How, do you have any thoughts about how you would identify participants in that process?
Sorry, my mic wasn't on. Yeah, so I think, we can look at a lot of things. So if we look at page 3 there, months 6 through 7, that's when those focus group meetings are possibly going to occur. So I think just looking at this just off the top of my head, so economic development, we would want to invite anyone who's on some of these economic development corporations or committees. I believe we have one for Dunn County, things like that, local businesses.
So they're kind of open.
Yeah, I think, that's kind of
Okay.
where, we'd have to do some groundwork before we put them together, but
Sure.
yeah, I think I'm trying to look at the rest of that section too here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can
I
I-
think
can I
each one
follow-
we could kind of identify those, but you guys could certainly, we would keep you in the loop, and, I'm sure we could discuss that at PR&D meetings too, where you guys would have input on that.
Just a follow-up on that. When I see West Central Wisconsin Planning Commission project costs down here, they're doing the focus group meetings. Now, wouldn't they be the ones that do all the work for the focus group? No?
Well, I think in establishing samples and understanding where, what kind of input we want, the county would absolutely have to be involved. That's not something that I mean, they have pretty good firsthand information about the counties they work in, but not detailed, I think, enough. But I think they should actually conduct the focus
Okay,
groups.
okay, I get it. So we'd help pick the people.
Yeah.
And the goals.
And the goals and the questions
Okay.
and the framework,
And then they do
and
it.
then they do it.
Okay, I get it. Thank you.
I'm sorry if that made no sense.
Oh, it does now as long as I can remember it.
Could I just add to that?
Sure.
So just to kind of come off of that too, this is still your plan. This is being developed by you. We're reaching out to them to get assistance. You're still running this show. It's not a set it and forget it. There will be check-ins with the committee. All the decisions will still be made by the committee. But again, like you said, I think Supervisor Kinnear, they're the ones that are going to be paid to kind of organize those and put them together based on feedback from the committee.
Thank you. Since we do have a town board chair here informally, Jean, do you have any thoughts about this process? Yeah,
Just give it.
you come up here, Jean. I'm sorry, I put you in an awkward spot there, but I would appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us.
That's what happens.
Yeah, well, that's good. I like this committee. Really, in fact, during the original rezone, I used to show up like every week. Yeah. Anyways, yeah, no, the town of Lucas is undergoing a update of our plan as well. And so I'm going to share this with our plan commission so we could use it as a template or take the parts that apply to the township. I don't know, I like the idea that the towns will be involved with the discussions because it's critical. I mean, this is, like you're saying, this is the important thing with respect to our land use and the rezones and everything. I mean, it's the essence of our community. It provides the tone for the community. Do we want to do this rather than having a haphazard development, which is, becomes problematic because it just benefits few and hurts others. Anyway, is that what you were hoping for?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the one concern I have, and we obviously can deal with it as we go forward, but, that when we get to the town level, that we really do have participation from, the plan commission in the towns, and not just the, but I'm not sure how that happens or what that works out to, but it seems to me like that discussion, that the county could help facilitate that discussion.
And Mr. Chairman, may I? Just a thought, I think the towns could be enormously helpful to the county and to West Central Planning in terms of identifying appropriate stakeholders and helping us get a broader awareness of their surveys being proposed and focus groups and so on. I mean, you have more sort of on the ground information than we do. So I think this needs to be a kind of collaborative effort to that extent.
And we welcome that opportunity. Yeah, we've now got a great plan commission, and it's, I think that they'd appreciate being included in those discussions.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay.
So, in terms of how we want to approach the total project and budget, do we have any guidance for Ann, or? Yeah, I wonder, Ann, if there are, I mean, if there are things that you think we wouldn't need their help with, or could, I think it'd be okay with the committee if you suggested modifying the agreement so that it was clear that some of those things are going to be handled by the county. But in general, I'm sensing that we support the plan and feel like it's a fair offer. Barry?
I think it's quite reasonable. There might be some savings on the margins, but I think it looks.
Because this year is a plan for the whole county, right? But yet, on a group 9 to 10, it's a group meeting with zone townships. And you're leaving a good fourth of the county that's not being really representative there, just because they're not zoned.
Good point. So Ann, have you thought about that? How to engage with the unzoned towns?
So they're still included. So I think the intention with that month 9 through 10 is to look at things like land use trends, recommendations, and their preferred land use maps. Those things are really key for like what we talked about earlier for those rezonings. So any town that has county zoning, they're going to focus a little bit more on them. I don't think the intention is to exclude anyone from the zoned towns, but I 100% agree that I would really like to get them in on these conversations a little bit more. And I think there should be room for maybe we have a group meeting with those unzoned towns and make sure it's covered in here. So I think that's an excellent point, and I would really like to bring that up with Susan today.
But I think that the more townships that are zoned, that the stronger you are. And that might be just a good avenue to get them more acquainted with what the comprehensive plan is and how it works. Good point. Thank you.
Do you feel like you got enough perspective from us, Ann?
Yeah, and I think too, what I can do if the committee would like, I'd love to have that conversation with Susan, and then I'd also like to go through this a little more in detail with my staff, and we can bring this kind of back to the committee again and have it a little bit more solid before we move forward.
Okay, sounds good. Everyone's nodding. Thank you. This, I think it'll be, this week. I'm glad you were involving regional planning. This will be a good process. Okay, let's go to 9A, consideration of the conservation plan amendment.
So in your packet, you'll see a letter of intent that the applicants provided, and then some other documentation regarding the conservation plan amendment itself, and then a map of the exact location. I'll let Rick kind of maybe lead us through a little bit of the conservation plan amendment, and then, as you're aware, the applicants, Gene Ringer and Barbara Flom, are here. And I guess it's at your discretion if you want to allow them to speak, but I think, like Rick mentioned earlier in the presentation, we're bringing this before you, hopefully at a state of agreement amongst all parties, and this is in some ways a formality, to approve this plan amendment, but also obviously to keep you informed and provide an opportunity for your input as well. But so with that, I'll let Rick kind of give a little highlight of what the amendment is itself.
Yeah, I guess in general, working with Gene and Barb, trying to identify what is allowed for them to do in terms of management. We ultimately came to this document to allow them enough flexibility to do the majority of the management that they see fit in the most efficient manner on how to maintain the easement. And then in the second page of the conservation plan amendment document, we needed to list this, like the hang, mowing and spray with chemicals. That text is taken directly from one of the DADCAP guidance documents that I talked about earlier, and DADCAP requested we put that exact language in. So it meets their criteria, and a lot of the other stuff is more or less to make the landowners aware of where they can find technical documents if they have questions about, forage harvest management, or, how to, some of the requirements for taking care of a filter strip and that type of stuff. But the main nuts and bolts of this document are those line items that we took directly out from the DADCAP guidance document. Essentially, and as Chase said, if you want to allow the landowners a chance to speak, but essentially they're looking at taking one or doing one mowing or haying hay crop off the southern boundary, and then managing the northern crop boundary, via spot treatment or spot mowing as they see fit. And all the stuff in the document, like I said, we talked about with DADCAP staff, and they seem to kind of give their initial blessing on that everything is up to par and everything. And I guess I just want to make a comment with the whole conservation plan amendment process. Gene and Barb were the first ones. Were the first ones to go through with figuring out what this entailed, and I just want to say thank you to them for hanging in there through the whole thing, because there was a ton of back and forth and signing things different times and telling them one thing and getting an answer, and they've had a lot of patience and they've cooperated with everything DADCAP has said. So yeah, I don't really see any issues with what they're asking for.
Yeah, I thank you for those comments. Gene, I know you, and Barb, I know you guys I've heard your frustrations before. Do you want to explain to us what, come up with again and share with us?
No, we were surprised by the report that we were out of compliance when we were inspected, but it's been actually fairly easy to work with this buffer between us and Madison's DATCAP to bring us back into compliance. We had planted some trees provided by the Fish and Wildlife Service, oak trees for red-headed woodpecker habitat that we had to cut down. But other than that, so we just things that we thought we had permission for, and now we will be fully in compliance, I think, with the addition of the formal agreement to do haying on that filter strip. And we have cut down the trees that they asked us to cut down. So it is a really confusing process, and I really have to hand it to your county staff for making us calmer through the process. So.
Any questions any further comments?
So just one question, is there an easement on this land? Because I'm looking at the picture of it there. Does that mean that because the easement line doesn't go most places up to the creek, is the creek also public fishing in? Because it seems like it comes out a little ways the line.
I'm sorry, Gene, go ahead. If I could just provide a comment, this easement this CREP easement does not allow public access.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this is strictly just for Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which is to
Okay.
maintain habitat. There is no public access required for this particular easement.
Okay,
So-
good.
And sorry, Gene, go ahead if you have more.
Well, and I was also just gonna say that CREP only covers cropland. And so that it wouldn't go to the stream bank in any case, because you can't plunk to the stream bank.
Some people try.
Well, and that's part of why we embraced this permanent easement, because we thought it was the best for that particular parcels of land. Again, like Barb mentioned, it's like, we thought Oak Savannah would be perfect. But the other is I would mention is that we also have a DNR easement on it so that there is fishing on that stream. And we've had a number of people that come and fish it and they catch brook trout there, and it's a nice parcel. So I invite any of you to come on out and enjoy.
And the other question, can you hay it every year once then, or is that just one time every year? And you can keep the hay then too, and for your own animals or sell it?
Yep, that's correct, right? Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like a good deal then.
The downside is it has to be after July 31st, so we will have some very tall hay. But yeah.
Yes, this year. Okay, so the committee needs to vote.
It is an action item.
So
You
I
have
need
to
a
approve
motion to
the.
approve the. Is it Morehouse? Is there a second?
I'll second that motion.
Is there seconds? Any further discussion? All in favor of approving the amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Amendment's approved. Before you all go, let's see, consideration announcements. Our future meeting date is July 17th. I'd like to discuss the agenda if I could. And here's what I'm thinking. We had a contentious county board meeting about the ADU siting, and the board approved the first reading. And it seemed to me like one of the questions that came up was, do we, and which we argued, is that we have adequate, what am I looking for the right word, standards in place to protect the concerns that are being raised by people who want special exception status. And I felt like maybe we didn't have as good a discussion about that as we could have. And I'm wondering whether the committee would be, and whether Ann would be interested in having a discussion item or a agenda item in our next meeting to sort of review the standards and make sure that we all understand what it is that we're endorsing one last time. I'm not going to do that if nobody else thinks that's a good idea, but that's my thought. Any objections to that?
I mean, we have discussed them and discussed them and discussed them.
Just reviewing them, I don't see it, how it would hurt. We forget things and maybe we don't always understand everything we think we understand, but I can hear it again.
Yeah, I could
Can't
too.
take that long.
Okay.
I think it'd be good policy just because of the discussion. So if, I'll put that on the agenda. Christian, I have a question for you. And so we have our next board meeting is the 28th, and then we have right after, about 2 weeks later, we have or 3 weeks later, we have the you know, 31st, yeah. If anyone were to introduce an amendment to the ordinance, would that require an entirely new first reading, or could that be considered as in decision making?
No, you can consider that in decision making.
Okay.
You can
Right.
adopt the ordinance with amendments.
Thank you.
Hey, easy answer, Bert.
He's getting good at this. Anybody else have anything they want to put on the agenda? Or, okay, all right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Ann. We are adjourned.